You win and lose as an owner, as an investor, the day you buy that property. If you buy that property right, you underwrote it properly, you didn't stretch too far because you fell in love with a building. If you can stay rational, you're going to find that you made a good investment.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 54. My guest today is Justin Hentemann, a principal at MTH Management, which was started back in 1997 by Justin's father, so it's a family business. And Justin got his start in this business cleaning hallways and doing landscaping. He worked his way up through maintenance, property manager / supervisor, all the way up to becoming vice president of the company. MTH Management specializes mostly in large apartment communities. They have over 2,000 units in Michigan, but they also do some smaller multifamily. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you having me.
You not only have real estate in your blood, because it's part of your family business, you have a law degree as well.
I do. My father put a high precedence on making sure that you could not only work with your hands, but also with your brains. So I had to start working at a young age and also had to make sure that I got a finance degree from Michigan State and a law degree from Michigan State also.
Your dad started the business, a property management company, back in 1997.
That's correct.
How old were you at that point?
I was born in 88, so I'm going to do poorly on the math here, but I was probably I think I was in the 6th grade or so, roughly 5th, 6th grade when we started the company. We started out almost as an afterthought. My father was originally doing insurance work, and after he grew up on the west side of the state, kind of poor family guy, that type of thing. His family put a high precedence on education, so he came to the Lansing area to get a law degree from Cooley Law School. And because he was poor, he needed to find a way to go and find housing that was affordable. So he decided to start working for a large property management company in the Lansing area. That company that he worked for at the time managed about 3,000 units and was probably the largest local management company in the East Lansing / Lansing market. So while he went and got his education at Cooley, he operated as a resident manager. He was back in the 80s, buildings kind of multifamily operated totally different than the way that it does nowadays. But he was an on-site manager, did a little bit of maintenance and that type of thing. So he got married, had me, all those good things happened, and right after he had me, he decided that he needed to put down his hopes of being an attorney, when he graduated and got into something that would generate revenue a little bit quicker. So he started an insurance and financial associates, which was doing group health insurance and mutual funds and those type of things. He didn't do stocks really. So he ran that for a couple of years. Life was good. At the same time, ironically, because they were still relatively humble means, my mother took over his resident manager jobs that he used to have. So she started working in multifamily then, and my dad's practice was really picking up and things were great. So it looked like that was going to be the future and that's the way life would be. And I would have gone on and just gone to college and done something on my own.
So what happened to turn him back to real estate managing?
PHP decided that they were going to cut commissions within 6 months to 9 months.
What's PHP?
Physician's Health Plan, I believe is what it is. That was who he would do some of his group health insurance for companies. So they decided they were going to cut commissions, and he just built a brand new house in St. John's. And suddenly he was looking at taking almost a 40% cut in revenue coming in every year, and he started to get a little nervous. And at the time that my mom was retired, so over the last 2 years, right before this happened, the owner of the company that they used to work for in the Lansing area, which was Hamco Management, the owner had died. And when he had passed away, there was no successor to his business. So what ended up happening was another large company in the Lansing area called DTN Management purchased all of the management contracts of Hamco Management. And so Hamco, which was about 3,000 units at the time, and DTN, which was probably 3,000 units at the time also, immediately turned into 6,000 and some units. So a lot of owners that used to be with Hamco, were small fish in a big pond. And a couple of them had asked, hey, if someone could start a management company where we could get a little bit more hands-on feelings and, have someone a little bit more dedicated to our properties, who would that be? And the widow of the owner said, Mark and Vicky Hentemann would probably be the best candidates for that, but they, that's not what they're doing.
They're out of the business.
Yeah, they're out of the
retired.
business. We don't know if that's something they want to do. So my dad had the great inclination to say no about 3 times before we started this company. And the real catalyst is obviously PHP cutting commissions. So my dad starts the company, tells the gentleman, you know what, I'll manage your property until you can sell them. Not even still going to go and put his feet totally into the water. And the rest is kind of history. We kind of turned into, from there we grew and turned into the company that we are today. But, my start and my foray into the management company was right there from the get-go. When my parents and my mother was still working as a resident manager herself, I used to accompany her to all of her showings and used to pick up trash and do little things like that. And I wasn't even in, I was kindergarten, I was less than that. We always have this story that when my mom would sign leases, when she was working for the old management company, that I would be sitting there watching cartoons on the couch, and the only line that I knew was I'd turn to the people that were signing their lease and I'd say, you can't break your lease. And that was the only thing that I had. So I guess it was a good foreshadowing of me going to law school and also our multifamily roots there. So we started the company though, and I started out at the bottom. I worked while I was in high school. I used to lay mulch, or middle school, I apologize. I would lay mulch. My mom would drop off myself and a couple of my buddies in a van, and we'd work all day in a Saturday, whether it rained or whatever it was. And we all thought we were kings because we were making $11 an hour in middle school, and that was the coolest thing that you could possibly have. And as time went on, I was always kind of a nosy type A personality, and I always would try to get involved in what my dad was doing for work. And so when they would talk about the multifamily, and when they would talk about the growth of a company that started out with only 200 units, or 150 units is what we started with. That was our jumping point into this endeavor. I would always ask questions, and I would always, I had this remembrance of when I was younger and my mom was doing it as a resident manager, and I would see how things were growing from an ownership standpoint as my dad would do things. And I, not being as smart as what I thought I was, always thought that I had great ideas even in, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. So I would always chime them in, and my dad would shoot them down. But he'd allow me to be there at the table, and I could hear and I could learn certain things. So I got into high school, and I'd been working grounds for quite some time for us, and I finally decided, you know what? Dad, you have people that vacuum your hallways every single day. Why don't you do this? Why don't you let me vacuum your hallways, and I'll do them for $10 less than what you're paying this company to go do it. Now, I'm not 18 yet, so I can't really start a company, but what I'll do is this. Why don't you start another company right now under your name, and then when I turn 18, you can transfer it over to me. And I'll go ahead and I'll get my buddies, and I'll pay them an hourly wage and whatever's left over, and I'll be a working foreman, and I'll vacuum hallways and clean them like a real company. And he said no. So I came back the next day. I said, Dad, this will work. And he said, you know what? He said, that's fine, but you got to buy the vacuums. You got to buy all the equipment. So I took the money that I had from grounds, bought some vacuums, and next thing you know, now I'm running a little mini cleaning company, I guess. And we were small. We only, it was 2 days, we would work 2-3 days after school for 4 hours or so. We'd go from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock and do it. And that was my first real step at entrepreneurship. That was my first real step at being in charge of people. And that was my first step at being a leader. And I can tell you that being the leader of your younger brother, who already was a pain in the butt, and your best friend from high school, is a really trying thing for a last year middle school, first year high school gentleman who can't even fully drive yet at that moment in time. And so we learned a lot. And from there, I was able to run our ground. Then I started running once I could drive, I started running our grounds crews. I was running our cleaning crews. I started, I also expanded my company into doing painting for our properties. So I started painting units with a couple of my buddies and paying all of them, $11, $12 an hour while they were in high school. And next thing you know, I'm in college, and it's the first point in my entire life when my companies were so large, or our company had started to grow. I graduated in 2007 from a local high school in the Lansing area, and in 07 and 08 is right when the recession started to hit. So at this point in time, when I graduated and I went off to college, we were about a 400 unit management company. The recession hits, and over the next 2-3 years, where the aftermath and the real hurt and the pain that came from the recession started to set in, our company grew exponentially. We went from 400 to 800 the next year, and then from 800 up to 1,500, and then 15 to 2,000, all in a matter of about 3 years.
Now, why is that? Because you're going through a recession. You would think that would hurt the business.
You would. We were... My dad always used to joke that we were the Mexico of property management. When you couldn't get, if you had cancer or something and you couldn't get the traditional methods here in the United States, you would go down to Mexico and try something a little bit different that wasn't, maybe it was holistic, or maybe it was, just not experimental, but maybe it was like something like a Gerson's or anything like that. So needless to say, we don't need to go into any cancer or medical foray. Needless to say, though, we were an alternative to big box management companies that were not very prevalent at that moment in time. Our focus as a management company is efficiency. Our focus is how to minimize costs, how to streamline operations so that you are able to lower churn costs. One of our biggest things that we focus on is turnover. If a resident lives in your unit for only a year, by the time you add in the rent that you got, the cost that it took to get that unit ready to go, and then the cost to go and return that unit over when they leave, you realize there's not really that much of a profit margin in it. You need to find ways to get residents to stay in your units for about a year and a half before they really start to profit, or before they're really beneficial for the property owner and for the entity itself. So we looked at things on how we could minimize expenses, and how we could keep residents that were good paying residents in the building, so that you weren't having these people moving around from one apartment complex to another. And to be honest, we just had a very hands-on family approach that you would expect out of someone coming out of a 400 unit family-owned management company. And so we grew significantly.
So you doubled in size during that point.
We did, and doubled in size the first year, and then after that added about 500 units each year going forward. And in that, go ahead.
Well, back up for a moment. So, just briefly talk about the big box management style. What is it that they do differently that you were able to improve upon?
Well, for better or for worse, we find that it works well. But some other individuals may disagree, or there's other companies that have different philosophies. But a lot of big box management companies have a style in which they believe, okay, they use a one size or a cookie cutter, one size fits all type of mentality, which is, if you've got a 150 unit building, yes, you can put a resident manager there and a maintenance man there, and that's enough work typically for one individual to have. But when you got a 40 unit building, a 40 unit building can't handle a full-time 40-hour-a-week resident manager.
You can't afford that.
Yeah, exactly, and a full-time maintenance man. So what we used to do was we found ways of improvising. Sometimes we would take individuals that other management companies wouldn't want. Maybe it was someone that we thought that a large management company wants to be able to fit into a mindset of, okay, this resident manager can take on bills. They can enter bills into a system. They can take rent checks. They can enter rent checks into a system. They can do all of these different things, because what they want to do if you're a management company is your management fees based on gross rents traditionally. And when it's based on gross rents, the more work that can be paid for by the building is less staff that you have to have. So we had a consolidated office. We actually have all of our rent checks still mailed to our headquarters. all of our checks are entered by a payables or a receivables department. That receivables department's covered within my 5% gross rent management fee. My payables, all bills are mailed to my home office is where they're mailed to. It cuts down on items like embezzlement, cuts down on, or it allows us to control or to have control over internal controls within our company for if you have an audit or something like that. And ultimately, it allows a resident manager to be paid a little bit less, but also to focus on the one thing that we believe is the most important thing for a resident manager. And the most important thing for a resident manager is to lease units. If they don't fill units, your property dies. So I don't need my resident manager to be an accountant. I don't need my resident manager to be a payables expert. What I want my resident manager to do is take phone calls, be nice and articulate, and be able to rent units, handle the little bit of paperwork that goes with, say, maybe Section 8 or MISHDA, or with just signing leases if it's a normal, traditional fair market property that doesn't have those type of things on it. Being able to do the things that allow to get a resident into the unit and then take the phone calls of residents when they have complaints. Those are their focus. That's what they need to do. And I think that brings that touch back to your residents, that they don't feel like they're just part of a cog in a big machine. It allows them to know that they've got someone that wants to sit down and that can talk about them, because it's not, oh, hey, I got to get this weekly report out, or, oh, hey, if I don't get this to the bank, the checks are going to bounce, and all these other responsibilities that typically, and I don't want to generalize, there's some big boxes that do it differently, but that is a very large staple of the industry, has these resident managers doing more than just resident manager work or property manager work. Or on a bigger property, they'll have a resident manager and then they'll have a leasing agent. So it'll be 150 units and you got a leasing agent. The leasing agent does what I want my resident manager to do. And then you have a property manager who oversees it, who does all of the accounting stuff on the backside. So we simplified the system. We have that all done in our main office. We can control it. It's all sent to our office. I see these individuals every day when I'm in the office and can talk with them and get reports and see where we're at. And that was one of the main focuses that we had. In addition to that, when you've got a lot of properties in a geographical area, say like we have 1,000 units in Lansing alone, and then we have about another 800 or 900 to 1,000 units throughout the rest of the state of Michigan. But in Lansing alone, where I have over 1,000 units, I don't have a single maintenance man that is tied to one individual unit or one individual building. My maintenance men, I have about 6 of them in the area. They rover around on a need-be basis based on their work orders, and they're able to, it's pretty much your cost and your expense to your building owner is a la carte. It's only when you're there. Outside of that, they're not sitting there logging hours for doing nothing. So the managers find work that might need to be done, and that doesn't mean that you neglect things like, hey, look, that little soffit fell down. Well, that's not, the tenant doesn't notice that, so that's not a big deal. No, the managers put those work orders in, but the gentlemen are not just sitting there looking for work. They're driving around, they're going from one project to another, and that allows for efficiency on the expense side of things for my building owners. So this was our philosophy. We were going to minimize the responsibilities of resident managers so that their true focus was only on leasing apartments, which we thought was in answering phone calls. Mm-hmm. We streamlined our maintenance men so that we were able to eradicate and get rid of dead weight, where you're sitting on a property for just hours on end and you need to find a way to fill your 40-hour work week. Otherwise, you don't, the maintenance man can't put food on his own table and the property just can't afford it. And then we looked for efficiencies within our own company and how we could streamline things in back office so that we were more efficient from that standpoint, because that's where it came directly out of our management fee. So we utilize these things. And
so during the recession, then this philosophy seemed to have taken off with, what was it, the banks who were then bringing you properties to manage, or where were you getting the new properties that helped you double in size and then add another 500 units per year?
We grew in very unique ways. We first had a gentleman who walked in who was a large building owner who had a management company that he had been utilizing that just didn't work, or that wasn't working out for him. And he brought in about 400 and some units. They were all in Flint, which was a rough area at the time.
So you were are you still managing in Flint?
After the recession, about 2 years ago, when you started to notice this uptick in sales again, where banks were finally, okay, not only were interest rates low, but the banks were finally able to open their purse strings and they felt comfortable in doing so, that he was able to sell them.
Okay.
But we, as a case study, we brought on these properties. There was about 400, and each building was about 130. So, is that 390 or something like that? Yeah, about 130, so 390 roughly units in total there. And each property, one property had 50 vacants, one property had 30 vacants, and another one had 25.
Wow.
So significant vacancy.
That's
issues.
when you took these properties.
That's when we
on.
took them over. And one of them was a low income tax credit property. So you had compliance issues that you had to deal with, in addition to just being able to go out and lower the rent. You had to still income qualify these individuals. So there was a lot of extra work and a lot of paperwork that went with that. So this was that was probably our first foray into LIHTC at the time. We'd never done LIHTC.
LIHTC, and you just said it, but let's say it again. LIHTC being low income tax credit
properties.
Which basically the government, the federal government or the state government?
It can depend. There's a lot of different subsidiaries that the funding can come through. So
they're basically subsidizing the rents of the tenants.
Kind of. The way that it's actually a little bit more unique than that. One of the biggest misconceptions is subsidized or of low income tax credit housing is that they're all subsidized. They're actually not. A lot of times it can just be that what is designed is that the owner who develops these particular properties is typically a developer. He makes money up front on a development fee or something of that nature. He then has a property that he has to run in conformity with what MISHDA or with HUD or with RD, rural development, with what their plans are for that particular property. Now, the benefit is they usually have traditionally lower property taxes, and they also, have a newer style building because they were built under a program just recently. And, but the units have to income qualify in the sense of such. You can't the units are controlled rent-wise, so we're told we can only rent this unit for, say, $700. That's the maximum that we can rent it for. And of the $700, then the individual has to income qualify. So the individual may only be able to make, as a single person, may only be able to make, say, $16,000 to $20,000 a year. And I apologize because I am not articulate on the income qualifications for every individual property. They change. Every county is different based on the mean aggregates of the gross income for that county. There's just a lot of different things that go into it. But hypothetically speaking, let's say an individual can only make $18,000. And then in addition to that, so you have someone anyone that has got a good credit score of over $700 that might want to live in this newer style property in a place, say Marshall, Michigan or something. Now we have to turn away someone because they make too much money. So they have a great 700 credit score, but they make more than 18,000. Suddenly I can't rent to them. So I have to find a way to find individuals that make less than $18,000 a year, who have hopefully a good credit score, but we all can kind of read between the lines, and that might be a little bit more difficult. And we have to put them into a property where they're going to live and be able to pay rent when the bulk of that rent is, and they still have to pay the going rate of whatever it is. So let's say it's $650 is what the max is. They still have to pay that and still make less than $18,000 a year. So you can see the conundrum that you get into.
So is that why these properties in Flint had so much vacancy? One
of them did, for that one particular reason, and the other two were simply just because of the probably the management team beforehand. That they just weren't being run properly. So we came in, and this was our first LIHTC deal, in addition to two other non-LIHTC, just your normal conventional properties, but they were all each 130 units, but they were in Flint. And so we go through, we start managing them. And the two properties that were conventional, we were able to get up to, I believe we were averaging 6 vacants to 5 vacants on both of those properties. And on the LIHTC,
so you got it up above a 95% occupancy.
That's correct. And an economic occupancy, I would say, was probably closer to 92, with bad debt. Maybe as low as 90, but 92 is probably where it was with economic
occupancy and bad debt being people who are living there
but are not paying their rent.
Exactly. Or owe a lot of money.
Yes, 100%. That's exactly correct. And then we were able to get the LIHTC style property up to 94% occupied, and actually the bad debt there was pretty consistent with the other one. So we were still probably operating around 92 to 90% economic occupancy, which for Flint is really good.
Yeah.
That's a difficult market, and this was during the recession. We're starting to see some of these numbers improve now, but at that time it was very difficult. So
and during the recession, the banks were very strict about where they would lend. In fact, in West Michigan was, I don't know what they called it, redlined during that period. I'm sure Flint must have been too.
Absolutely. I think almost everybody just decided the whole state of Michigan was redlined.
Detroit, the bankruptcy of Detroit at that time really kind of painted us all with that brush. But what that meant basically is if you had a large commercial property and someone wanted to buy it, they would have a very difficult time getting a commercial loan.
They would, and refis too. And remember, you had covenants in loans that were traditionally never utilized. That now you're starting to see. Oh, well, if you don't have a 1.2 debt to loan service ratio, and the property's not making money, you're in trouble here now, because there were banks that were universally across the board. If it was in Michigan and they could get rid of it, whether it was through a covenant or whatever it was, they were just foreclosing to get the properties off of their books is what they were doing. So I had a situation where I had to take a property that was definitely outside of its loan covenants when it came on board. We had to and of great size. This was what jumped us from a 400 unit management company to 1,000 units. So we had to deal with all the internal issues of growing into a company that now suddenly has layers in the onion, opposed to just having my father that ran it. I was a freshman in college, or a sophomore in college at this time. So here I am in college, still trying to get a degree and everything.
In law?
No, Michigan State for finance right now. This is my undergrad, not my law school. So here we are. We're trying to run a family business. We have to deal with all the internal issues of growing and the growing pains that you would expect from a company that has been such a ma and pa and doing things in a very ma and pa way. You didn't have formal set policies. You didn't have all the things that we have nowadays in our company. We had to do that all on the fly, in addition to loan covenants and other concerns that we had about the property. So it was a very trying time for us. And the LIHTC component, we had no experience with whatsoever. So we had to get brought up to speed on LIHTC, which we had never dealt with compliance.
Yeah, and by the way, the compliance part is ruthless. For people who don't understand what that word means, compliance is when you have a unique structure like a LIHTC property or a Fannie Mae loan. Yeah, the lender and with LIHTC, I'm sure
it could be either the lender or the syndicators too.
So they have very strict rules and reports that they want to see.
They do, because they need to make sure so that they don't have any recall of the tax credits that they sell for these properties. They need to make sure that these individuals that you're putting in legitimately are income qualified, so that we're not lying and putting in someone who makes $23,000 a year.
Right. So it becomes a very bureaucratic process.
Absolutely.
And you have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's.
That's correct. We have to have proof of everything. We have to have, you have to have bank statements for every single one of the people that move in. You have to have valid IDs. You have to have even if it's a very, very small Roth IRA or anything that these individuals might have, whether through their work, whether through inheritance or whatever, every aspect of income has to be accounted for and has to be in their file, along with certain type of check-in sheets and all types of things. And you have to conform using their certain style.
So as a manager of these properties, that's a lot of work for you.
It is. It's a ton.
You almost need to have a specialized person on your staff to make sure that
absolutely
compliance.
And in the beginning we didn't, so we had to learn by trial by fire, and it was a process. And then as time goes on, then we have someone on our staff who's knowledgeable in it and now can run it. So we've grown. So of our 2,000 units that we manage, about 400 of them are LIHTC style units at this moment. And I'm going to call LIHTC. I'm going to call them all income based to some capacity, because we have multiple programs that have their own different sets of rules. rules. You have MSHDA finance properties, which are financed by the state of Michigan. You have HUD finance properties, which you can even get on conventional style loans. You can just go out and get a HUD loan.
And that's not necessarily affordable housing.
Exactly. That's not necessarily
that
affordable
can be a
housing.
Conventional market rate.
It
housing.
can be, but they do express, or as theoretically as they're almost the owner in that, or they are the owner in that sense, and they put upon you things like getting audited every single year. They have certain requirements that you have to fall within. And then we also manage what are considered RD properties, which are rural developed properties back from the 80s that are typically a lot of like senior citizens homes and those type of things that were built in small communities all across the state, and farm communities that just didn't have anything for the aging community there. And they have their own set of rules that they have to go and deal with. So we had to become very astute in a lot of different things. And we had to have internal policies that were able to control all of these different requirements that went with how do you lease a unit? How do you get somebody in? How do you deal with someone that doesn't pay their rent in these type of units? How do you do all the monthly reportings? And one of the unique things and real challenges initially for us was switching from being just a normal, traditional cash operating statement management company to being able to produce accrual accounting operating statements. And it wasn't just that accrual was as simple as, okay, go in your operating system, whether it's Rent Manager or Yardi or Appfolio, and switch it from a cash to accrual. You had to understand that there was more to it than that. If you're
you're getting into some high level accounting here.
Yeah.
But so let's make it as simple as possible. The traditional cash style of accounting versus accrual. What very simply, what is the cash style?
A cash style accounting is very similar to what you would expect to see even on your own checkbook. You pretty much, here's your money in, here's your expenses out, and you post expenses the moment you write the check for them. You want to have some reports in there that might say, yes, I have, here's my accounts receivable, or here's the bills that we have to still pay. You're going to have those reports, but you traditionally on your income statement or on your profit and loss, whatever you call it, you're not going to post any expense until the moment you write that expense. So when you finally pay the janitor or the cleaning company for vacuuming the hallways every single month, that's when you see the custodial expense on your income statement.
So is it the same as if you were to go online and just look at your checking account?
Very similar, exactly. Mm-hmm. Pretty much identical. It's going to mirror it almost.
That's the cash style of accounting.
That is.
So very simply then, what is the accrual style?
The accrual is more challenging.
And yeah, when you say it, it sounds like cruel.
Oh, sorry.
But it's accrual.
Accrual. I apologize.
ACCRUAL.
Yes.
Accrual
accounting. So for anybody listening that's an accountant.
Anybody listening, you're getting a real education here.
You know what you have. For accrual accounting, you post things when theoretically the transaction happens. So
it's anticipatory. You're anticipating the payments, and you're anticipating
the incomes and the expenses in this situation. And I will be the first to admit that I have some very intelligent individuals on my staff that make up my accounting department that are much sharper than I am when it comes down to accounting. I like to joke with everyone that I know enough about accounting to get myself in trouble, just not enough to get myself back out of it. And that's the joy of being a finance major and not an accounting major when I went to undergrad. But needless to say, the layman term of it is that income, that a transaction, something is posted in your accounting software when it happens, not when the cash actually leaves the bank, not when the check is actually written. So you post all of your revenue on the first of the month, and it's called your gross rent potential. That's what your property should bring in. Then you have line items below that are clear, or that are journal enteried out or are trued up at the end of the month, that talk about things like loss to lease, which is when you rent, if all your market rent on a particular unit is all $700, let's say across the board, and you rent it for $680, you'd have $20 for loss to lease because you lease that unit for $20 less. If you have a vacancy, you're going to lose $700, and you're going to call that loss to vacancy is what you're going to have. And then you're also going to have loss to, I believe believe it's lost a bad debt or something. You can call it different things, but essentially that's the delinquency on the property, the people that just didn't pay. And what that does is and we're getting into some detailed items, but and then on expenses, you post expenses when they happen, not just when you when you write the check for them.
So if the lawn company comes to mow the grass, they mowed the grass, but you've already, in the accrual method, you've already put that expense.
You've already
into the books.
You've already anticipated,
even though they may not have received the check yet.
That's correct.
That accrual method puts that.
You do. You put it into the books. Now we post it once a lot of times, even in our system, we're a little behind in the sense that theoretically you could post it the moment that they mow the lawn. We post it traditionally when we get the invoice is usually what it is. But one of the unique things, or one of the challenges, actually going back to how I got on point with this is as a growing company, some of the things that we had to go through and learn was that we had properties that were LIHTC that didn't have a whole lot of money when we initially started with them. These were properties that were challenged and were struggling. And so as a new company that didn't understand how accrual accounting is not just how you do the accounting on the books, but it's a whole philosophy on how you run your entire office. My payables department, or the gentleman who handled our payables, was maybe lackadaisical, or was a little slow at one point in entering some of these invoices, because his mindset was, well, this is just for the lawn mowing. We know that we're probably not going to pay him in the 30 net. We're probably going to pay him in the 60
we can hold off
category.
Paying this bill.
So I don't need to enter it at this moment in time. So what we found out is that if every single month, if you don't enter that bill into your system and you can't post it in your system as an expense in there, that statement is wrong. You're not showing an expense that should be there, just because the building didn't have enough money to pay for it doesn't mean it doesn't show up on an accrual style operating statement. It has to be there as an expense for it, regardless if there was money there or not to actually pay for it. So we philosophically and internally within our company had to learn a lot of these things, because when you dive into the markets of RD and MSHDA and LIHTC, not so much LIHTC you can get away with not having audits, but any individual property that you manage that is funded directly by Michigan or MSHDA or by RD is going to get an audit every single year. And when they come in and do the audit of these accrual style statements, if you haven't done this and you haven't put all your statements at the end of the month, you have to have all your bills in. Let's say, for example, you don't do that. You have these, when the auditors come in which we ran into our very, very first year, and this was years ago, but our very first year was we didn't enter all of our bills on December 31st that needed to be in, that were really should have been in the calendar year of that particular, of say 2013 or 2012, whatever it was. And we got our hands slapped really, really hard when the auditors came in and they had $30,000 in corrective journal entries to go and take expenses that were actually put in accrual statements in January that should have been on the previous year. So we had to learn a lot. And that was a growing pain for a small style management company that didn't have anyone in particular in the beginning that was that had an accounting background and learning how to get through some of these things so that you could deal with audits on a regular basis. So we had to go out and hire staff that were more adept with these more complex accounting standards.
Yeah. So the lesson there, if you are going to own MSHDA or LIHTC or even a property where you get a HUD loan, make sure your management company understands the compliance part of dealing with these loans. And it's not just, I get it. It's like they have to have experience.
They do.
Doing the compliance for these types of loans. Going back to the Flint property, or properties, you had a real tight situation there, because with that type of vacancy, I can imagine that these properties were cash flow negative.
They initially, yes, they were.
So how do you turn around a property like that's cash flow negative and get it back into a profitable area?
Well, every property is going to be a little bit different. So I can't use a one-size-fits-all manner and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But as a general rule of thumb, the very first thing that I am going to do is I'm probably going to look at my staff first and see how I can consolidate staff. I've already articulated in this podcast that I look at things a little bit different than big box management companies. So I'm going to come in and where you might see in a big box management company 3 employees, I might have 2 or 1.5. On other, and on other things, my benchmark is probably a little bit more.
So you're going to cut expenses by having less employees,
absolutely,
and being more efficient with their time.
With the employees that we do have, absolutely.
So part of it is cutting expenses, and you start with the employees. Where else do you look?
You're going to look at first. I'm going to look at my employees, and then the next thing that I'm going to do is instead of letting employees run the ship and run things, I'm going to have a supervisor, or I'm going to have myself or someone of our brain trust of our management company dig in and start to run that property probably for the first 30 to 90 to even 160 days. And they're going to come on board, and our supervisors are going to oversee our staff that we hire, whether we're working with the existing staff or whether we hired cleaned house because no one could get on board with the way that we manage property, because it might be
there's a new sheriff in town.
Sometimes they don't like the way we do things, or they're, old dogs don't learn new tricks very well. However we dealt with it, because every case is different. I've had some where I've inherited employees and love them and they've been great. And I've had other times where employees have left us within 3 minutes of meeting us. It kind of goes both ways. And, so we're going to come in, we're going to look at the employees first. We are going to take a very compartmentalized approach to maintenance. We are going to the mindset is going to be, when you've got 30 vacants on a 150 unit building or 130 unit building, let's say, you are going to have to do one of two things. You have to take care of your existing tenants that are there, because it goes to our core philosophy that we don't want churn. We don't want people moving out solely because I don't like this place or maintenance isn't getting done. So we have to find a way to go and continue to do all the maintenance for the existing tenants. The next thing that we need to do is we're going to go and we're going to put an inventory in on all of the units that are or that are vacant.
You said put an inventory in, so figure out what you need to replace.
Correct. We're going to look at all of them, and maybe we won't get quite as detailed as what we got to replace and those type of things. What we're going to do is this: we're going to rank them on 30 vacants. We're going to rank them from 1 to 30. What's my easiest and what's my most difficult? And I'm going to take my 10 most easy or my 5 easiest units, and I'm going to say these are the ones that we're going to get ready for lease now. We turn those 5 over, get them ready to go. So if someone walked in that door with a 700 credit score and, $1,000 in their pocket, they don't walk out that door and go somewhere else. They stay here. We will sign that lease. We put them in if they got to move in.
You have an aggressive leasing method. Then.
Exactly. Well, what I would say is that you do not want to have to tell someone, I cannot move you in today. Mm-hmm. You want that as long as they qualify to what our specifications are, all of our income qualifications and all the things that we have from a quality control standpoint, that if they need to have a unit that day, you don't want them going anywhere else.
All right. So you make sure there's a unit ready to go.
Absolutely. So we're going to take the easiest 5 or easiest 7 or easiest 10, whatever we believe. We're going to get those units immediately ready to go, and then we're going to stop. And we're going to stop spending money at that moment in time. And we are going to rent 3 or 4 or 5. Let's say I did 10 units. And when I get to 5, after I rent 5 of those units and I'm maintaining my current clientele that we have in the building, we are then going to do another 5 units. So at any given time, there's always anywhere between 3 to 5 units that are immediately move-in ready. And what we're doing in this situation is if renting is going slowly, let's say it's in the winter months when things are not nearly as fast as what they are in the summer, we're not spending money on turning all 30 units all at once. We're going to take the easiest ones that we can so we can minimize it, because you got to remember that this building is theoretically, at least in this case study that we're discussing, is hemorrhaging money. So if I'm spending it when I'm hemorrhaging it, where's that money coming from? It's coming out of one guy's pocket, and that's the guy that owns it.
So you're going to the owner.
You got to go to the owner. What do you got to do?
Pony up $10,000.
Exactly, 100%.
So that we can start taking
so you
care
can
of
get so you can get through things, and then you have that awkward or discomforting conversation where you say, "Look, I'm really sorry for the way that the previous management team ran things," or "I'm really sorry." Sometimes it's as awkward as saying, "I'm really sorry for the way that you were managing things beforehand, but this is what I have to do. Here's how I'm trying to minimize you writing a check," which is what we don't want to do. I don't want to go for cap draws. I want to find a way to make these difficult properties right from day one. If I can find a way to squeeze out enough money, cut some expenses here and do certain things, hopefully I don't even need to do that. But sometimes when you're dealing with 130 units, you can't change a man of war or a battle cruiser around in one turn. It takes a little bit. There's a lot of things that you got to do to get that ship pointed in the right direction. So what we end up doing is, as I said, we're going to consolidate our overhead by meaning our employees. We're going to look at our easiest units to turn. So we're going to turn those particular units and get them ready to rock and roll. And then from there, we're going to stop, which means you might get maintenance completely on a 100 and some unit building. That maintenance men are probably still chugging along on work orders. Yeah, they're probably working on work orders and things like that. But that's how you can go from 3 maintenance men down to 1 maintenance man, or 3 maintenance men down to 2 maintenance men, because a lot of big boxes they want to staff for the worst case scenario so that they're always accounted for. And then in the good case scenarios or in the downtimes like the winter, suddenly you've got a lot of excess capacity that isn't really being utilized. And the only guy paying for that, or the only gal paying for that, is the building owner or the entity that owns the that owns the property. So at the end of the day, who does it help to have a ton of employees on a property? Makes management companies' life a lot easier, but it doesn't help my building owner who's using this as as an investment, as a tool to make more money. And hopefully, if they make more money, you grow, and that's the goal.
So you ramp it up. You knock out 5 to 10 units that are ready to go.
Yep.
And then you stop.
Yep.
You pull back, and then you wait till you lease those out, and then you ramp it up.
At least 5.
So you get to,
and then you do another 5.
So you keep a comfortable margin.
Exactly.
But then you ramp it up again.
You got it.
And get another 5 to 10 ready to go, and you just keep stopping, ramping until you get to 95 stabilized.
And then once you're stabilized, you allocate your staff in an appropriate manner to handle a stabilized property, and always bearing in mind that you're going to have that month where crazy things happen. But depending on how close you are, in our situation, how close you are to a hub of other or of other properties within our management company, when I need to, I can allocate labor from other properties to come over and temporarily help out if you had something crazy. So in the situation with Flint, we had almost 400 units. So each property, we were running 2 maintenance men for those 400 units, which was a little aggressive, or 390 units. So each maintenance man was covering had a responsibility of roughly 180 units or so, 190 units, which is a little higher than what I like. I like a maintenance man to have somewhere between 125 and 150. I think that's a good number. I think any more than that, and they have to do a lot of work. But Flint was so close to Lansing that whenever those 2 guys got to the point where, okay, we got hit, we had 7, 8 people move out.
They're falling behind.
They're falling behind. Mm-hmm. I could take my labor from Lansing, my roving maintenance men that I had there, and I would just drive them out there for 2 days. Still cheaper than an outside contractor coming in and doing work. And all I had to do was pay for 40 minutes worth of drive time at $12, $13 an hour, get them out there. They'd help out for 2-3 days, get the guys right back on shot or back on track, just like getting a little shot in the arm to get you going where you need to go. And away they went. And then they could go and they could hold that for a period of time. So we were able to get the properties to the point where, outside of any overhead, meaning your mortgage and how you purchase them, which is always the success of being an owner, it comes down to your acquisition cost at the end of the day a lot of times. Outside of that, we had all of these properties cash flowing and not making cap calls by the time they were sold about 3 years later.
So let's focus on what you just said. The success of being an owner a lot of times comes back to your acquisition cost.
Always.
So you make your money when you buy.
Every time.
And so in practical terms, what does that mean? Because I'll tell you what it means to me. It means, okay, if you overpay for a property and you have a loan on that property, 70, 80% loan, or whatever it might be, you're going to have the cost of paying that loan every month.
You got it.
And that's a huge cost. That can be anywhere from 20 to 40% of your income.
Sometimes, depending on the property and how much you overpurchased or how well you underpurchased. That's absolutely true. It can be a very large spread there. The reality from an owner standpoint, not as a management company, and as a gentleman with a finance degree who looks for properties for his building owners, you win and lose as an owner, as an investor, the day, or you make all your money, or you win and lose the day you buy that property. If you buy that property right, meaning you underwrote it properly, meaning you didn't stretch too far because you fell in love with a building or you just had to have this one property. If you can stay rational and you can stay as a calculated investor, you make your money the day you buy it, because if you buy it properly, that building will make money the way it'll make money continuously. It should make money without any hiccups. And as long as you planned for things like CapEx reserves and some of the necessary things that you need to do when you're looking at a multifamily property, you're going to find that you made a good investment. Where the problem is when building owners stretched, which is what you saw before the recession. You had buildings that were being sold for dollar amounts that just didn't make sense based on the way the properties had been performing historically. I, as a management company, can only spin so much straw into gold. There's only so much that I can do, and there's a certain level, there's a certain point where the overhead is like an anchor tied to the ship or tied to someone's ankle, and you can swim and you can swim and you can paddle and keep your head above water for so long. But sooner or later, if that anchor's too big, you go down. And if that anchor isn't too big and that anchor's adequate, then you keep going and you can keep this property up and running and life is great until you either pay it off or get to the point that you want to sell it or something like that. But if that anchor's too big and that overhead, meaning your mortgage, is too large on that property, no matter what I do, or no matter what any management company does, there is only so much that you can play with. There's only so many expenses you can cut. There is only so much efficiencies you can bring to the table before you get to the point that you have to do something to the detriment of the building or have to ask for a cap call. And by detriment to the building, I mean neglecting to do CapEx expenses. So
by the way, CapEx expenses, capital
roofs,
expenses.
Capital expenses, your roofs, your parking lots, your siding, your windows, your hallway carpet. You, sooner or later, those are always the big ticket items that always get kicked to the can. That's the can that gets kicked down the road every single time. I can get another 2 years out of that roof. Let me get a guy up there to put a Band-Aid on it. Sooner or later, those come due. And there's no way around that. And if you didn't properly buy the building, if you didn't properly plan for how much money you want to put away in reserves for CapEx when you need it, if you thought that rents were going to just grow much faster or be much greater than what they really actually are in reality, or you just thought you could undercut expenses significantly and come to find out you're in a market where you can't, you then run sooner or later, you can make the numbers look good for a little while. But you'll get to the point where when those CapEx items start to rear their ugly heads, that there's suddenly an issue then. And that's when you find out, oh no, I either need to go to the building owner for money, or oh no, this is what we were talking about. This is when we got to start looking to sell the building. You come to this circumstance. And a good management company can help you. We can prolong it. A good management company can keep you from never ever getting to that point, especially if you've adequately bought a building. As a management company that also helps advise its owners when they look for new deals, you want to have a management company that is sophisticated enough to know and advise you on that building makes sense. No, that building doesn't make sense. Here's what I think you need to purchase this building for. And, I myself, that's typically what I do. We have a lot of knowledge in that, and we try to do a good job of advising our building owners on when to buy buildings and when not to. So
yeah, and that's exactly why in my acquiring of properties, I've always aligned myself with good management companies.
Absolutely.
So that when I'm looking at them, I can have my management company look at it too before the fact.
Absolutely.
And say what, yeah, you're going to have to put a new roof on this in 2 years. Mm-hmm. You need a good management company to help you understand what the rent situation is. Can you improve the rents? Is there upside? What's the tenant situation? Are there too many delinquencies? Mm-hmm. A good management company can help you look at all of those things.
You do, and they can be, not that they don't exist. They can be difficult to find. There is an inherent, I guess from a sole investor standpoint, there's always that inherent risk or that always perceived bias that a management company just wants to grow for the sake of growing, because our income is tied to typically a management fee. That's been the historic way that our industry has operated for I think probably since the beginning. As long as I can imagine, we've always just worked off of a gross management fee typically, and so there's always that risk that a management company will say, yeah, sure, buy that because we just want to grow. But if you have
good for the management.
It is, yeah, good for the management company, maybe not good for the building owner. But if you're young like myself, and I think I aged myself at some point, but I'm 28, and you're looking at this as a marathon, you're looking at this as many, many years to grow. Our management team, what I'm looking to do, what MTH is looking to do, and what I'm trying to align myself with are maybe not young per se, but we're looking for investors that have a long-term plan. We're looking for, building owners that want to acquire assets for a marathon or for a long-term plan, and not just someone, this is my one building I want to buy. And it doesn't mean I don't manage for building owners that this is their only asset or something like that. We definitely do. But when we're looking with individuals that are looking for a long-term trajectory, we want to make sure that we advise them well, because it's significantly better to put them in a good investment that does well, so that they buy 2, 3, 4 more that all do well, opposed to, that one's a little questionable, let's go for it because I know that I really want the management fee. There's this, if you're looking at it from a long-term standpoint, that's not what you want to do. And there might be some that are out there, some companies that maybe aren't sophisticated enough to really understand. They know how to run property, but maybe they don't really understand how investments work. There are some differences.
There's a big difference between property management companies. You have the property management companies that are used to like single families and maybe some small multifamilies. Mm-hmm. Your company, MTH Management, is more about the large apartment complexes. Yeah. It's not. You do have some small.
We do. We have a little bit of everything. I mean, depending on location, I'll do 12 and up. But what we like, obviously, everyone likes 100-unit buildings. It likes 150-unit buildings.
When you get to that size. Mm-hmm. That's a business.
It is.
It's not just a rental property. It's a business. And you need a management company that understands the business aspect of it. And I think we've talked a lot about that, the compliance parts, the accounting part, the difference in philosophy between the management companies that manage those large properties and the ones that manage the smaller properties. Because, I've seen it definitely in my career. I mean, there's a lot of good management companies in West Michigan, but not all of them are prepared or understand how to manage the larger apartment communities.
Absolutely, and I think that, and I believe that there is definitely a there's a significant gap between those that can actually advise on how to be a building owner, on how to make investments that are sound for the owner, so that the management company can run the property efficiently. There's a lot of people, or there's a lot of companies, as you had alluded to, that can if you bring them in on this one building, they could probably run it really well. But can they help you make strategic decisions? Can they help you plan for the next 20, 15 years of how you're going to be involved in the real estate, in the multifamily real estate market? I'll be the first to admit we're not a very big player in commercial real estate. That's not really one of our fortes.
You mean non-residential?
Or non-residential? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yes, non-residential.
You're obviously a big player in commercial residential.
Commercial residential, exactly. But in non-residential, that's not really one of our strong suits.
So like office space. If I had an office building or a industrial complex.
Exactly. Those are things I'm not very skilled at. I'll be the first to admit it. I can handle some mixed-use buildings where I got multifamily upstairs and some resident and commercial downstairs. We don't have the leads. We can't generate the things that you're going to get with an NAI or a CBRE or some of these brokerage house or it's
commercial real estate
real estate brokerage firms that get those leads. I don't have a connection to Ford. I don't have a connection to Tesla, Coveris or some of these big companies out there where you're going to get those leads that are going to filter into you. So what I know how to do and what I'm good at is running multifamily commercial commercial multifamily properties. Those are the things I'm good at, and I can do mixed use, and we do that well.
And so strategically, you talked about having a plan, like a 10-year plan or a 15-year plan. What do you do with your owners? how do you build that into your service where you can help them look out past just this year, but in the next 10 years?
Well, when it comes down to the property, I mean, there's obviously the items that you have to do. Okay, I believe we did well this year, or I believe, and here's the things that we think we notice about the property. Here's CapEx that we think we see over the next couple of years. Here's things that we believe. That's your microcosm approach. That's what we got to do for this one particular property. Long term, though, on a macro level, the question then comes in, what are we going to do to help you as an investor? If you're truly an investor that wants to be a player in this game, not just someone who, I had a lot of money and I bought a building and I need someone to manage it because I don't really know how, but people tell me that owning real estate's a good idea, so I bought this apartment complex. Not that
everyone else is doing it.
Exactly. Everyone else is doing it. And there's those people out there. So anyone listening who's trying to get into it, it's not a slap. It's just to say there are some people like that and their plan really is just to have one building and that's it. They can go and they'll do some stock market stuff. They'll do, some investments here or in real estate, and that's about it. But if you're someone who's really going to dive into this, the first thing that I like to do is I like to sit down and get an idea of where they want to be in 10 years. And some building owners will say, this is about it. And other building owners say, this is what I want to do. This is what I love. I have another job where I generate money, but long term, I just want to own a lot of real estate. And then at some point, maybe I'll stop my job. Maybe I'll still do it because I love working, because there's some of us out there that actually like going every day and working and those type of things. And, so I'll sit down and I'll talk with them and I'll get a feel for, okay, what's your risk level like? And sometimes people will say, well, and it's very typical, well, I want to make a lot of money. Well, that doesn't do me a whole lot of good. Let's talk about what, and we have to understand, there's cap rates for every single property. You have an understanding of what type of cap rates are going to qualify on a certain quality of asset. And you have to understand the basics of finance in the sense of, for every incremental amount of risk that you take, you should get an incremental amount of reward. And so that meaning in layman terms is this. If you have two options, you have a Class A property, which is a nice property. It's sitting in a very good area. It's got high rents. It has, nice cars in the parking lot. Then you got a Class C property where you've got a little bit more rough around the edges. You got some cars that, have, maybe all the windows and everything are all intact, but, they definitely are older, and you've got just a little bit more of a rougher neighborhood or something like that. If you're going to buy them and you're looking at it on a percentage rate of return, you're going to get a lower percentage rate of return on the nice asset than what you want to get on the more deteriorated asset. And the reason being is this: there's more risk in the deteriorated asset. So
more risk, more reward.
So you got to have more reward. Otherwise, why do you want to spend your money there? Because if I can get the same reward, let's say it's 10%. If I can get the same reward in a nice property as a bad property, why would I ever buy the bad property? Because I'd rather buy the nice property, because at least it's good and it's going to function and it's going to be easier. So some individuals need to be schooled on this and how this works and what they need to look for on rates of return. And then from that, then you come in and you say, okay, now that we understand where you want to be risk-wise and where you want to be on your return, now what we want to look for is good deals. So then you have to go out now and you have to look at assets and you have to run numbers on them and you have to come up with, okay, I think I can run this building for this. And when you find deals that internally you can put a different cap rate on them than, say, what a broker would put on them or what other people perceive their value to be, and you can find a deal that you think is an 8 cap, meaning, if you bought it in all cash, you would get an 8% rate of return, when everyone else ballparks it at maybe a 6 3/4 or at a 7 cap, or you find a 9 cap that is ballparked as a 7 cap. When you start to find those deals, and they're far and few,
they're getting further and
further away from each other. Yeah, exactly. It's getting very, very difficult to find in the current market that we have right now. But when you find them, those are the ones that you take to your building owners and you say, look, guys, this is the deal. And sometimes they come really large. Sometimes they're $8 million deals or $12 million deals or $16 million deals. And sometimes they're $500,000 deals. Mm-hmm. It just depends.
And the reason you find them, and add your reason to it as well, but the reason you find those deals is because you see something that other people don't see. You see, well, they're spending too much over here,
Absolutely.
And I know we can bring efficiencies to this property that will save us a lot of money there. Or there's some upside in rent that they're not factoring in.
100%. That's exactly it.
So this is the kind of information that you have to bring to a deal, or knowledge that you need to bring, that will help you find those deals that even the broker might think is a 7 cap, but you realize,
100%.
well, hey, once you take it over, you can run it at a 9 cap.
Exactly. That is exactly what it is. So you have to, and being a young individual in this market, as I said, I'm 28, and I now have, at least I can say, well, I got a management team and I got 70 employees, and I have a law degree and a finance degree. I mean, there's certain things that I can bring to the table, but 3-4 years ago, this was much more challenging for me. I didn't know any of the brokers. No brokers would ever pick up my phone call. I had to go find brokered deals that are out there in the big shops, and I would have to look at them and see something that they didn't see, which is exactly, Brian, what you're talking about, which is I had to see expenses that were just way too heavy that I thought that I could cut, or something on the revenue that just didn't quite make sense. It was too low. And usually the brokers do a good job of finding a way to raise the revenues on every pro forma. So normally I'm looking
every property is below market.
Yeah.
There's
Exactly. There's always something. So I'm usually looking more on the expense side of things. That's usually what I'm looking at. And I had to start the hard way and start making phone calls. And then I finally got, I got to close a deal once, and I got one of my building owners to finally go through with a deal. So then you get a broker that starts to talk to you, and then you go out and you start talking to more brokers, and you keep trying to build this net and this networking, and you hope for that you can get some off-market deals. We all know that doesn't happen very often. But the main thing is that you want to be in good connection with the brokers, and that's something that my management team can bring, because I'm out there and I'm doing that, and I got my ear to the ground on what's going on in the business. And I'm constantly running numbers on new deals, and sometimes I see them and sometimes I don't.
Okay, so given that, what is going on in the market? What are you finding in Michigan as far as values? And are you seeing some deals out there where the numbers make sense?
Not a lot. There's one, there's one right now I'm looking at. And outside of that, though, in my opinion, there is a lot of unreal expectations of sellers right now on what property is really worth. I think there's even some unreal expectations in what some buyers are doing out there right now that just baffles me. I scratch my head and say, I don't get it. And
buyers who are paying
more than what I believe. Exactly. Banks are writing. Our banks are willing to fund deals right now, though, so that's a good thing. That was a problem that we used to have. I mean, that was a problem in the recession, was that you could find a deal that made sense because everyone was trying to sell everything in the recession. And you could find, and they were going to sell them at discounts. The problem was, unless you had cash, you weren't going to get any deals done because everything had to be a cash deal during the recession. Right now, the banks are willing to loan, so that's not going to be a problem for you. But I'm just not seeing a whole lot of deals in the Michigan market in general. And I'm not seeing it in Northern Ohio right now either, or Northern Indiana. I've even expanded my viewing range to increase and see if I can find, bigger deals. A 150 unit building or a 200 unit building in Fort Wayne would not be off the radar for me. I'm looking for certain things, and I'm just not seeing anything at this moment in time that is really that good. So, it is. Right now there's either unreal expectations by sellers to sell too high, and because of that, I think there's not a whole lot of inventory on the market from a broker standpoint. If you look around, there's not a whole lot of people selling at this moment in time, and anything that is just not really worth anything that I want to put inside of or put in front of any of my investors at this moment. So,
So you're bringing investors into deals?
I'm not syndicating deals in the sense that I'm asking for ownership components of it. What I am doing right now is I am bringing deals that I find to individuals that can close, and telling them what I believe our management company can run them for, so that they can purchase the properties and I can manage the properties as I build relationships with individuals, and these being my owners. So I know them not as a syndication, but I know them as my building owner and someone that I talk to in the the building's doing well and someone I talk to when the building's not doing so well. At some point in time, I would absolutely like to say, you know what, why don't you if I find the deal, I want 5 or 10% ownership in the building, and then then I want to be able to manage it or something like that. But that's a long-term plan. That's something that's in one of those long-term strategies that you talk to somebody about. That's what I would love to do. I would love to have skin in the game. As I grow and have more of my own war chest, I wouldn't mind, getting a small sliver for finding the deal and then putting in some of my own cash so that there's skin in the game. That I don't have a problem with. But at this moment, especially for someone's first time doing business with me, you get to own it. I just found it. This is what I think it can do. And if it doesn't work out, you can move management companies. You can take it back. You can do all types of things. You can come after me, I guess, to a certain extent. I mean, it just like all brokers, you always think that you can do something a certain way, but we've have a proven track record of being able to provide, when we put the seal of approval on something, when we say this is what we're going to run it as, we've had a good proven record of running properties the way that we expect to run properties. So.
Yeah. Well, you've got the experience and the properties under your belt there that you can have a pretty reasonable expectation of what a property is going to take to run.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk briefly about the Lansing market. I mean, I haven't talked to many people about Lansing, and I know that's kind of where you're located. What do you find in the Lansing market?
Well, Lansing's unique because we are a college town. So you almost have a market within a market. You have the market of East Lansing, which is a student-driven property area.
Michigan State
University. Michigan State is seeing significant supply growth. We're right now. Next year, the university's adding a couple, or probably 1,500 beds. Which it could equate to maybe 800 or so units, depending on 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms.
That's a huge influx. Are they going to be able to absorb all that?
Well, and then there's another project that is another 2,000 beds that's going in also.
Wow.
And then there's another project that's going in that's about another 1,000 beds.
And is this student housing or is
all
this market
student
rate?
Housing?
All student housing.
I mean, it's market rate in the sense that you're going to rent it for as much as they possibly can, but it's a student driven is what it is. The expectation is that the growth of the university will be able to accommodate this and support this type of building growth. As long as Michigan State has noticed, I mean, it has a lot of foreign exchange students that are, every year the number of exchange students is just increasing and increasing and increasing.
So it's a lot of international students.
A lot of international students, exactly. Mm-hmm. So there's always this, who typically are, as a rule of thumb, are usually very wealthy. So you're seeing these kind of, this growth influx as a way of as they say, to house them. But the reality is that they're just trying to be able to bring in a lot of foreign students to come into the area to rent and to pay, double the tuition because they're foreign exchange students, and then also to drive their Maseratis around Michigan State. So that's what we see a lot of. So the East Lansing market, or the student market, is growing. There's a lot of supply there. The Lansing market itself is not experiencing a whole lot of growth at this moment in time. You're not seeing too much of it. And Lansing is, I'm generalizing Lansing as a very large area. I'm generalizing Lansing as some of the burbs around it and that type of thing also.
And Lansing would be considered the second largest city in Michigan behind Detroit?
No, we would be the third. Grand Rapids is larger.
All right.
Yeah. So and if I had to choose, I would be in Grand Rapids. So Grand Rapids is a gorgeous place to live. So anyone that doesn't know where Brian's from, Grand Rapids is excellent. So there's no doubt about that.
Very proud of Grand Rapids.
Absolutely. Detroit won. And when we talk, a lot of us here in Michigan, when I say Detroit, unless you're from Detroit, they want to say I'm from actually Detroit. But when I look at Detroit, I mean the burbs and everything around it.
You've got Wayne County,
exactly.
Which is, all the suburbs.
You have everything else, which is great. There's a ton of affluence in the suburbs around Detroit. You have Grand Rapids in its zone in the burbs around Grand Rapids, and then you have Lansing. So Lansing, we're not seeing a whole lot of growth from a standpoint of new construction.
However, in looking at demographic studies, I have seen that the anticipated just population growth is there.
They have, and it's unique to see how they're quite allocating that. I still believe I think Lansing's a stable market, and I think because of the you have the capital here, you have a university, which means professors and other things that are going to be you get some fringe benefits from the universities.
It's also the state capital.
Yep.
You've got GM and
correct
some manufacturing and
we have a little bit. Yep, we do, and we also just had a plant that cut a lot of hours. So
That's true.
mean, it goes in a lot of different. But the reality is that I would say Lansing is a relatively stable market for the most part. It's not a huge home run market or anything, but it's a relatively stable market for sure.
You're not going to see the huge upside when you buy there, but it seems like you should see some good stable occupancy and stable rents.
You are buying in Lansing for a coupon. You're not buying for appreciation. So you're buying in Lansing because you want an asset, or the Lansing area because you want an asset that's going to turn off some form of a percentage every single month or every single year, whether that's 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever you feel comfortable with in your acquisition of a property. You're going to see that you're going to get that check. When it comes time to sell, maybe you'll have appreciation, maybe you won't. Depends when you sell, how you run the property. It is not a given, though, that in Lansing, that if you bought it for $300 or for $1 million, that you're selling it for 1.1. That's not going to be a staple of the Michigan or of the Lansing market. And then obviously in conjunction with that, you still have then all the market factors that affect Michigan as a whole too. Now, which would play into effect as to up and down, more so probably than just saying that the Lansing market's going to increase and appreciate. Now, if you were in Grand Rapids, I would say that appreciation isn't out of the question. I think that here that there is a genuine reality that property does sell for more as time goes on. Detroit, in the burbs, you definitely see that. In Detroit, the core, there's a complete lack of housing, so everything in there is all new. You have the new lofts and all the new developers that are going in there. So
my impression is that it's packed. I mean, they have 100% occupancy.
They do,
and it's
and the waiting list incredible.
Yeah,
Dan Gilbert needs to build more stuff. Every guy down there needs to get some chunks of money from the Detroit commissions over there to go and develop properties, because in the urban core down near Quicken Loans and near the stadiums and such, there's just not enough housing.
Not enough coming online
Correct.
Quick enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are, that's probably the good, understanding of the big core cities. And then throughout Michigan in general, I think you're just looking at traditionally you can find very stable style properties. You can find, I think in Michigan, as a rule of thumb, I would not put appreciation into any of my models that I was doing if I was trying to value an apartment complex. I'm going to look at, can this building stand on its own? Can this building turn off or spit out an 8% rate of return or a 10% rate of return or a 15% rate of return? But to have a pie in the sky or a long-term hope that, oh man, I'm going to sell this thing for more than I bought it for, that's not really what I see. Others may disagree, and there might be some pockets, as I say, Grand Rapids, where I think you can. But for the general rule of thumb for the state of Michigan, for the general rule of thumb for for Grand Rapids in Detroit, even probably Grand Rapids more out in the burbs, you may not even see it as much. But or tinge areas, as in like New Zealand or something like that, or Ionia or Greenville. Some of these areas are just a little outside the Grand Rapids market. I don't think you're going to see appreciation as a normal, consistent thing.
Well, and any appreciation you do see will be appreciation that you force. So if you come in and you find those efficiencies, the better management, more efficient management, maybe taking on some of the utility costs, installing more energy efficient utilities.
Increasing capex, roofs, windows, those type of things.
Yes, in an effort to get those rents up, then you can force some appreciation. But you're just saying, if you take an overall look at the Lansing area, you're not going to see that appreciation across the board.
100%. I think that's a very clear and good assessment of what I see, at least in the market.
So, Justin, this has been a very high-level conversation, I think, and any of our listeners who have made it to this point, which I hope are quite a few, congratulations, because I think you just got a good education from Justin in a lot of aspects, very vital aspects of large apartment communities and owning them, managing them, treating them like a business, and even dealing with the accounting portion of it. So thanks a lot, Justin, for all this great info. What advice do you have for the listeners who, are looking at this space or in this space and, maybe thinking of buying more or thinking of getting into it for the first time?
Well, I think to summarize most of our conversation today, I think the main things, if I was going to tell someone that was getting into this, or even someone who's been in it but maybe hasn't had the investments haven't been quite what they wanted, or maybe they have been but are just looking to grow. The main points that I want to hit on is the fact that you make your money when you buy a deal. You make your money in that initial moment when you actually acquire an asset at a price that makes sense. That's going to be the number one thing for any investor out there listening. And then the next thing is you got to have a good management company, or you have to be a good operator yourself if you're self-operating. And as long as if you can acquire the assets well and for the right price and not be too pie in the sky on what you think they're actually going to perform at, and be conservative. And then in addition to that, you can either align yourself with a really strong management company or do it yourself as a strong management company. Those are going to cover a wide berth of what your big issues are going to be from a multifamily standpoint. If you can have decent management and purchase the property well, you're going to be just fine. So the hardest thing is just finding deals that allow you to buy that deal, or to buy in a reasonable and conservative manner that you're comfortable with the rate of return that you're getting. And, and outside of that, when you're looking for a new management company, MTH Management's always looking for properties all across the state, northern Ohio, northern Indiana. We'd be looking for all of those areas. So we definitely would love to sit down and have conversations with any new investor, any investor out there right now who's not happy with where they're at. We definitely are looking to grow. We got a long-term plan. It's a family business, but we've got about 72 employees. I'm 28, and this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. There's no law I'm not looking to practice to be an attorney, not going to move to New York City and work for Blackstone or whatever the big investment firms are out there. This is what I want to do. This is what I love. This is what I enjoy. And this type of business is what I want to be in for the rest of my life. And we're definitely looking to grow. There's no doubt about that. So,
right. So MTH Management.
You got it.
Mary, Tom, Henry.
Yep.
Management.
Yep.
What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, we have, the best way would likely for this type of work would be my own personal email, but, which is jh@mthmgt.com. But you can look us up online at www.mthmgt.com. Our main office number, which goes to our headquarters, is 517-668-1800. We have secretaries 9 to 5 all day long that will pick up those phone calls. You just let them know that that you're interested in, or that you have multifamily, or you're interested in getting into it, and they're going to direct you over to me. So it's not going to be too difficult to get a hold of me. They know who to send it to as soon as someone goes down that vein, and it's not a maintenance request. So you call into our office and want to sit down and chat with me. I'd be more than willing to sit down and have some of these same identical conversations on a more specific and micro level, in the sense that we can talk about your property or one that you're looking to acquire or something like that.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure all that contact info is in the show notes.
Wonderful.
I'd also like to remind our listeners to go to iTunes. Even if you're not listening to this on iTunes or on your iPhone, going to iTunes and subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show is a big help. And I would ask that as a personal favor if you've made it this far in the podcast and you've listened to other episodes as well. Justin, thanks so much for having this conversation with us today.
Great. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.